Hey friends, have you ever considered how your values drive your identity or your perception of yourself and how you lead yourself and others? Well, today I'm diving way deep into the topic and conversation of values-based leadership with my new friend, Jack Cohen. He and I are going to unravel a whole bunch of things about values, identities, belief, action, mindset, all the easy things. So grab your cup of coffee and let's get started. Doing things alone is entirely overrated. We all need a community to thrive. And that's why I'm part of an online community of writers and speakers, podcasters, and entrepreneurs called Creatives. And I love it. In the years since I joined this community, I've launched new ideas and I finally executed the dreams that sat on the shelf for years. Seriously. And I was able to do this because of the outstanding group of mentors, exceptional training, and encouraging mastermind groups with my new friends who did and continue to give me invaluable feedback. Oh, and not to mention all the fun, because we have had lots and lots of fun. Have you ever said, I want to write a book? Or do you want to use your voice for the exciting world of podcasting? If so, Called Creatives is your best resource for up-to-the-minute industry training, expert advice, live coaching, and peer support like no other. Best-selling authors and speakers Allie Worthington and Lisa Whittle lead this community with a no-competition mission, and it shows. So join my friends and I in the Called Creative community. Head to my show notes, danitacummins.com/podcast, and click the link to get all the details to join. I promise you won't regret it. I look forward to seeing you in the community and watching you grow. Today, I am excited to have a conversation with Jack Cohen. His bio has several highlights, and I'm probably not going to do them all justice, but I will dig into a few key things. He's got 43 years of leadership experience, primarily in commercial real estate. He's a managing director at Aeromark Partners and the former CEO of Cohen Financial. He is a mentor capitalist, leadership educator, and the author of the Freedom Frameworks. As you can tell, Jack is a multifaceted leader, pilot, a scuba diver, and a lifelong learner, which I don't think I knew that you were a scuba diver when we talked the first time, but I love scuba diving. That's like my most favorite thing. So that could probably be its own podcast about all the leadership lessons that you can find underneath the sea. Jack is here today to talk about values, leadership, and decision-making and why that's so important. So thanks so much for joining me today, Jack. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me, and thank you for the robust introduction. I'm excited to chit-chat, and I know you and I will have fun. I hope listeners get something valuable out of it.
Robust. That's very good. Well, it was definitely hard to put it into like 3 little snippets or talking points. You want to tell anyone a little bit more about where you're from and how you came to be at this place in your life today?
Well, where to begin? So I live in Aspen, Colorado, although in this moment I'm calling you from Chicago, Illinois. I am happily married. It's the second marriage, but we've been together 25 years. My wife was a widow, and she had a girl and a boy. And I had 2 boys. And what was fun about that is in 2022, 3 of the 4 children decided to get married 4 months apart. And in November of 23, December of 2023, and February 25th of 24, we got our first, second, and third grandchild. So
no way.
Yep.
That's so exciting. So you went from like having son and daughter-in-laws to having grandbabies all at the same time. That is super cool. I wanted to get some of your insight because we're on this faith-driven leadership journey this year on the podcast and diving into that intersection where we have our values and how we build our organizations and we lead from that place. And so the first question I wanted to ask you, just in all your decades of leadership experience, how have your core values shaped your long-term success? If you zoomed out over all the 43 years, can you see this connection between your value system and how that's really shaped your career and your life?
I guess in hindsight, as you asked the question, there's things I can point out. Do I think I was conscious of it at age 25 and 35 and 45 and at 67? Maybe not so.
Yeah.
I live in a world of radical candor. Kim Scott wrote a book called Radical Candor, where she puts on a graph how much you care about people, not so much, versus how direct you are, not so much. And a lot of the people I know who care deeply about people really have a hard time confronting them directly. And I have found that to be a bad business practice, but also a bad relational practice. Although I confess I'm the girl in the relationship. My wife doesn't want to talk about anything, but I want to talk about everything. I value honor, integrity, doing the right thing when no one's looking. I think there's these things around transparency and authenticity that made me a different type of leader. I think that a lot of the people who have worked for me have been annoyed by me. They think I'm mean or I'm too direct or whatever. But over time, what they really understood was I really wasn't manipulating anyone. This is really what I thought. Like they all knew where I stood. And if you think about leadership in the context of leading, then don't you think it shouldn't be a mystery of what the leader believes and values? And so timeliness, attention to detail are things that you could be fastidious and not really exude it and make it a value in a business. And so, from my standpoint, I think I joke that I was not blessed with great skills, but I'm a grinder. Angela Duckworth wrote the book Grit. And so, I'm really one of those that can persevere. Clearly, these are beliefs that I have. Are they values? But, sometimes I confuse values and beliefs, but they drive what I think. And as we talked about before, I think values and beliefs and what you think drive your actions and your reactions. Because the fun thing about life is if we take a position, we make a decision. We've made the decision. Now we wait and watch impact. We can assess the impact and decide whether or not we like where we ended up and then make a new decision. And I think if you don't have values, if you don't have beliefs, your thoughts are all over the place. I joke with people that if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. I'm one of those weird people that goes through life assuming everyone is trustworthy and I trust them and then deduct for bad experiences. Where I have siblings who are the opposite. You're a zero and you can earn your way up, to trust. It works for them. My way works for me. I've never really been burned by that. I don't really know where that value or belief of trust and trustworthiness comes from. But if you're authentic and transparent and live in a space of radical candor, kind of easier to trust because you know what to expect. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. And I would just wonder, like with your career and working in the different fields that you worked in, when you talk about that radical candor and that transparency, did you find that was not what you always saw on the other side of the table or in the boardroom?
Yeah, you don't see it a lot, and it annoys me. And I think part of it is because right below the line. So if you live in radical candor, the punchline of Kim Scott's book is she lost her first business because she cared deeply but had trouble being direct with Bob, who wasn't doing the job and let the team down. She calls that ruinous empathy. So on the positive side, I know a lot of leaders that I know and work with who I think are in that category. They mean well, but they just can't have a direct or specific conflict discussion. But below the line, if you're direct and don't care about people, that's kind of obnoxious. If you're indirect and don't like people, that's kind of manipulative. And we know leaders like that. And so on that basis, you kind of have to find your people. I do think the universe speaks, right? Like associates will come to me differently than they would somebody who is manipulative. Again, I'm not suggesting that anyone really wants to be manipulated, but at the same time, I think there's a gravitational pull where we kind of find our people, if you will.
Yeah, I think that's very good. Your thoughts do control your actions and behaviors. And I think there's so much more power to that than we fully realize. From my faith perspective, I believe that to be very true. I believe very much in the promises of God and what those look like in my life and having bold courage to stand with my faith and my value system. But I didn't think that at 22, even 32 or 42, if I'm honest. This has just been within the last few years where I've really tried to focus in on what do I value. And if I couldn't define that for myself, then how am I supposed to find that for my team or the organization that I'm leading? Because they are looking at you as the leader. And then the other part is if I don't know what I value, then to your point, how can I measure if that thing that's being offered to me is going to be in alignment, or if it's going to be opposed, like magnets. And so I have just seen this evolve within the last few years of my own life. And I do find, and maybe it's age or I don't know, but it gives you a sense of peace, I think, for me in that place. Like you're saying, you get to that place where you're like, nope, that's not for me. To your point, I don't know if that's the manifestation of that positive and negative energy, or if there's some other part to that. But I do see that happening in my own life today as I'm walking through different decisions or business opportunities are offered to me. I can look at them from that value lens and I'm like, nope, we're not going to walk through that door. And it does give peace.
I think it's great. And I think it makes sense that you came to that later in life because it was something that I'll use the term manifest to create pull energy, right? And so whether it's a belief in a higher being or the values that the doctrines that have been passed down, it pulled you forward. And one of the things I find really interesting is that when you think about that outside of a church or synagogue doctrine, think about random people coming together on a team. Everyone was kind of raised in their own bubble with their own set of values. And I really think job one for leaders on a team or of a business isn't to profess that they're right, but find the set of values or rules of engagement or behavioral norms that everyone can rally around, because maybe not everyone is as thoughtfully purposeful as you were to find God and a doctrine to pull you forward. We need to find one unifying pull theory, pull energy to align a team. And I've always found it fascinating because it's just so funny to me when I listen to other people running businesses that are bitching and moaning about their people. And I'll say, well, did you tell them this or did you ask them this? And they said, no, they should know that. And I would say, John, wait, help me understand this. Do you have children? He'd say, yeah. And I say, John, when your children came out of the womb and learned to talk, did they learn to say please and thank you? Or did somebody have to tell them, we don't interrupt somebody when they're talking? We patiently wait for our turn. We say please, we say thank you. Well, of course, Jack, I didn't raise wolves. Yet you're going into the business world and you're not doing it. So does that mean you're raising wolves in business?
That's very good. I've sat in a lot of leadership seminars and workshops defining the behavior and getting very specific on that kind of behavior. And I feel like sometimes we don't do that either. We anchor around a set of value systems that we can all agree on. But the definition and the behaviors that are attached with those values are even hard to define. I was in a workshop earlier with a team that's writing a project charter. And so they're like, what do we value? What's important? Effective and open communication and clarity. Okay, well, then how are we going to do that, right? Because there will invariably be ineffective communication and someone's not going to be clear. And by the end of the workshop, you see people cutting each other off as they're literally trying to edit the document. And I was kind of like, point one, we wanted to be clear and kind and we wanted to offer grace. And we're already, humans are getting in each other's way. And so I just think that piece of it, as I've gotten a little bit older, I see that too. It's like you said, I value this thing, but then being accountable, I think we don't do that a lot as teams.
And think about that. Values and beliefs are open to interpretation, right? And that doesn't mean somebody's a bad human being. It means we have to talk about it. But I want to come back to something we were talking about, your journey and finding, purpose and values in God. Again, your success was driven by your self-awareness and the fact that you were moving forward purposefully. I found one of the problems with team members are individuals who aren't self-aware and they don't realize that they have a set of values and beliefs that are almost sub-basement. Now, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist, but we all know people who believe they're victims or believe the world is out to get them. Then somehow they find themselves in a lawsuit or taken advantage of. And I'm a big believer in the power of manifestation. And if you believe you are a victim, then you will put yourself in situations where you get victimized to prove yourself right I had a coach once who said, Jack, the strongest urge, impulse anyone has is to prove themselves right about their belief system. The problem is they're not always aware of what that belief system is.
Yeah. And how do you think that goes back to like our identity or self identity? That's a whole different conversation, but I think they're so radically connected.
I think you're 100% on point, and it's something leaders have to be aware of, right? Not everyone's left-handed, not everyone's right-handed. Not everyone is an introvert, not everyone is an extrovert. And one of the problems I find in businesses, and I found it in businesses that I've run where I wasn't really aware of it, is we were all running this story that the problem with you is you're just not enough like me. And if you would just listen to what I'm saying and follow me, we'll all be happier. Well, that's absolutely ridiculous. And so, if you think about Carol Dweck wrote a book called Mindset, and she talks about those people with growth mindsets and fixed mindsets. And those are different type of people. And it's not like being left-handed or right-handed. I am left-handed. I can't be right-handed. But I think you can move from fixed to growth mindset. And, I think the first step on the 12-step plan is self-awareness. And if you're not aware, you need to become aware. And then there are frameworks, Myers-Briggs, DISC. My favorite is something called Market Force, which really talks about 4 types of archetypes that all 4 are required to be on a team. And so the guy who taught me it used like the Beatles as an example. John Lennon was at 12 o'clock and Paul McCartney was at 3 o'clock, and George Harrison was at 6 o'clock, and Ringo Starr was at 9 o'clock. And the point being is the 4 of them created magnificent music that lasted for decades on decades. But those 4 people were not alike. And so awareness and where you are, back to values, beliefs, thoughts that drive your actions, and now pulling a team together where people can play positions and bring out one another's strength and learn to work with one another. For some people, I guess it's scary. For me, it's exciting.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it's a lifelong journey for all of us. But the point is, like you said, that's kind of the first step is like at least acknowledging that you've got something going on in there.
Do you have siblings?
I do have 2 brothers and a stepsister. Yeah.
Older, younger?
One of each. I'm in the middle. So 2 brothers, an older and a younger brother.
So I'm fascinated by birth order. And I think that one of the reasons why you're so self-aware and can step out of it and ask yourself why you're getting a rise out of something, maybe because you're a middle child, maybe because there were 3 other siblings and it was a large household that was fighting over finite resources and trying to market for positioning, if you will. And I know this is really terrible because we're back to God, right? I don't think any of us, we could want to have more children, and God's will is not that it's not going to happen, right? But I have found the worst catfight I ever had with employment was 2 people, male and female, in the same department. They were both brilliant and great performers, but they were both only children. And as only children, they were only used to having 2 sets of eyes focused on them, and they could do no wrong. And when we had 2 of those people, they weren't self-aware. They couldn't collaborate. I joked when I got divorced the only time, right? It's my second marriage, that I was looking for the 9th or 10th of an Irish Catholic family because I figured that woman none of my idiosyncratic firstborn issues would have bothered them because they grew up in a family of 10 or 12 in one bathroom and it's just not a big deal, right? And so I do think birth order and how you grew up in terms of a community, I think also prepares you for the skill you exuded, the muscle you were able to develop.
Yeah, I agree with you. Thanks for my therapy session today, Jack. Just kidding. But I grew up actually in a very dysfunctional, abusive home. It was really hard stuff. So I learned over the years through therapy and faith. A lot of that manifestation, like you said, being super hyper aware of what's going on, how people are feeling the emotions in the room and being able to read those emotions in the room starts out when you're a young child and you're growing up in that very abusive environment is survival, right? Because you have to read the room because you have to protect yourself. And that's just candidly how it is. So you develop this ability to read emotions and feel things and the temperature and the vibration maybe in a different way than maybe a child who doesn't have that, they're always looking over their shoulder. But over the years, I had to learn, and really through a lot of self-discovery again, and a lot of therapy and prayer, was like, is this how I'm wired? Did God make me this way, like this emotional kind of person, and I can empathetic and kind of these things? Or is it just a function of my trauma? To be honest, is it my trauma response? And so it's taken me a while to really unwrap those layers and to ask myself that. I work in a crisis ministry. I have for 15 years. And so for years, I thought, oh, this must be my calling, as we like to say. And it is still a great place where I love to work and serve. But it has been an evolution to kind of see how that experience growing up in that space of being the one who was taking care of everyone in this situation, how that manifested in my life and how it turned upside down, if I'm honest. So
thank you for sharing that. I really feel blessed that you felt comfortable enough to share that. And I'm sorry for that trauma in your life. But boy, oh boy, have you gotten past that. Look at the gifts that you've gotten from that. What's the old saying? God only gives us what we can handle. And that which does not kill you makes you stronger. And at some level, you develop skills. I've unfortunately seen people who had troubled youth, and their reaction isn't yours. You exude a glass half full energy. You exude the good and the positive, and let's all get along. We know people who have been so victimized that they fear being victimized again. They fear not having their needs met. They're either angry, passive aggressive, or they lash out, none of which is particularly helpful. But you can understand it because it's a defense mechanism. What you did is you really kind of was able to get inside your head and heart and say, was that me, or was that an unfortunate person who couldn't control their emotions? So I'm sorry, but I'm happy because look where you came out of the other end of this. And I'm sure that was not easy.
yeah, no, definitely not. And thank you for that. That was very kind. But I think it does offer your point about we bring all of ourselves to the office every day. I say that a lot. Like we bring all of ourselves, the good, the bad, the ugly. And we don't often mean to. I've been leading since I first joined the Air Force when I was 18. And I just remember having this thought just a couple of years into my military career. I was leading a team of 25 people on shift every day. And I thought everyone genuinely does want to do good, right? Like, at least in the environment that we are in. Like, everybody came to work today. They genuinely wanted to be there. They genuinely wanted to make a difference. They genuinely wanted to have a positive impact, right? Now, there are the few that you could say the exception. That wasn't true, but most people were really there and they wanted to do a good job. And so throughout my career, I've just always led from that place, like back to the trusting, like you said, where I just default to I think genuinely people are trying to do a good job. And so when you've got all of that icky stuff at work and it's all upside down, like you're saying, and there's conflict and all the things, I always try to go back to what are the words behind the words, back to that emotional intelligence. Like, okay, what's going on behind here? I've gotten some negative responses from that in the past from people who are like, I don't have time for this. I don't need to worry about what's going on in their mind. I just want them to do their job. But I try to challenge them as leaders, but it does matter. It does matter what's going on. And to your point, like not everybody maybe feels comfortable having those conversations, but I think it's relevant to what we do as leaders.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think everyone does their very best to survive and prosper, given wherever they are in their current reality. One of the things that I'm trying to do this year for myself is to have front and center grace, you use that word, and humility, right? And before I react, before I get mad, before I tell you that the trouble with you is you're not enough like me, could I have some grace? Could I pause and have some humility and try and see what's going on and hear, to your point, the words behind the word? This is one of the problems with being radical candor, right? I'm using words. There's no words behind it. I mean exactly what I said, right? But But that could be a little intimidating for people. It could be a little intense. And just because I'm cutting through it doesn't mean they feel comfortable doing the same. And so you're right. A high EQ is certainly more important than a high IQ, especially if you can learn to relate to people, because you can help them parse the good or the bad or the hard from the easy of what's going on in their day, and then they can be productive.
Yeah, I think that's really true. So you talked a little bit before, you mentioned frameworks, and I know you wrote your book, The Freedom Framework. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, what the book's about, and some of these tools and tips that you've found over your career that can help?
Thank you for asking. So, one of my values is freedom. I'm one of those people, I'm not really good at being caged. I'm not really good at being told what to do. That doesn't mean I should be irresponsible. So, freedom is something I value and I protect and fight for others. Pause. I also, remember I said I wasn't blessed as a great athlete. I have been collecting for 50 odd years what I call stupid human tricks, were the things I could learn to do, case in point, time management, to be able to perform better with my basic skill set. And so through the years, I collected these tools. Pause. For a number of decades, I have been facilitating roundtables with large people, not people who are large, but large groups of people. And one time I had this idea, wouldn't it be fun to do it with young professionals? And so at one of the associations at conferences twice a year in a ballroom closed to young professionals, I'd put a hollow square where 40 people could sit and talk, and I'd facilitate a 2-hour discussion. And year after year, session after session, it became clear that almost a third of the questions were on career management. And I thought, I don't know, could I inventory all of these frameworks and then organize the book as like a playbook, a self-efficacy, a self-management collection of frameworks that people could reach to and be, virtually their own, I hate the term self-help, right? They could grab a tool that would give them some leverage. And so that's where this actually really came from. The book is organized in terms of tools and how I use them. But the reality is you could read the book in any order to pick up a tool that you needed in that particular moment. I even have a chapter. The implication is that you're not being managed and led properly, right? So how do you get out from under that? I always say, if I went and got a job at Starbucks, they would teach me how to make that coffee and to make one of those little flower things, but they wouldn't teach me how to create my own coffee shop. And so here are a bunch of tools that you could use in that regard to help you lift from your station in life, if that's what you wanted to do. And my context was, everyone's on a journey. How can I help you optimize that journey?
Yeah, no, that's really good. Do you have a favorite of your frameworks in all those years? Is there something that sticks out where you're like, if I could only give you one?
If I could only give you one, it would be invest in yourself. If you think about what we do with our savings, is we buy a stock or we invest in a real property that gives us income, right? But think about it. The most valuable asset you'll ever have is yourself and your capacity to earn. So my view is there are only 3 keys to success in anyone's career, but you have to do it every day. Acquire skills, accumulate experiences, and develop relationships. And so invest in yourself. And by doing that, it's skills, experiences, and relationships. But now I want to go back to what we've been talking about for this entire time, right? Purpose, the pull energy. To me, if people are buried in their day-to-day, doing the best they can, they have this shroud around them that's tied to their current reality. So I have a framework where I encourage somebody to fantasize about an intended future. And when I say intended future, I mean pick a point in time in the future, 3 years, 30 years. By the time I'm 30, by the time I'm 60, it doesn't really matter. But literally fantasize the elements of your life you want at that point in time. Like, I've done coaching for a 35-year-old, and he says, what I want to do is I want to be a CRO. Can you help me? And I said, yes, I just have one question. What's a CRO? And he said, it's a chief revenue officer. And so I said, why? And he said, money, title, prestige. So I said, okay, let's just play with that. If you were this person that had the title and money and prestige, then what? What do you mean, then what? So in Alice in Wonderland, Alice is running across the big chess piece, and the rabbit says, Alice, where are you going? And she says, I don't know. And he says, if you don't know where you're going, any path will get you there. So I think it's critically important for people to will themselves, give themselves permission to fantasize about an intended future, inventory the elements, and that's phase one. Phase two, at a different point in time, you need to come back and do an assessment, right? If my fantasy is to run a dive shop in Portugal, and my current reality is I'm now certified, but I don't speak Portuguese, then clearly I need to build an action plan to bridge the gap of no language skill to language skill. And I think businesses are like that, teams are like that, individuals are like that. And I think that creates pull energy to help people go where they want to go.
I've done a lot of career coaching or mentoring, but I often get the answer, I don't know. I don't know what I want to do. When you ask people, what do you want to do? I don't really know. It could be we haven't had the chance or freedom to dream because we're surviving every day. I think there's probably a lot of pieces in there. But how have you seen that, or are there tools to offer?
I think words matter, right? I have found that most people, when you ask them what they want to be when they grow up, or what they want to do, or what they even want, they can't answer it for a whole host of reasons. Maybe they're not creative enough, they can't imagine it, or maybe they have self-doubt and don't believe they can earn it. And so I have found the word change to pick a point in time in your future and describe for me the elements of your life at that time. Well, okay, that person might say, well, I have a partner that's helping me raise my children, that I have not just this one child, I have three, that I'm not living paycheck to paycheck, that I'm living in a community of faith. I have found I can get them to inventory that if they're willing to let go and fantasize. But when they're trapped in their current reality, we can't see. I really want to go on vacation. I'm overworked. I'm tired. Oh, my car broke down. I don't have enough money for that. I'm late with the rent, the landlord. There's all of these things. Again, some people are unlucky and end up with misfortune, and they're starting from a deeper hole. And so I'm not suggesting that there's a silver bullet or a panacea, but I have found that finding something to pull me out, give me full energy, is what I need. And then I talk about this in the book. Love cartoons, love superheroes. But do you remember Tarzan? And whether you saw the old Johnny Weissmuller or you saw the Disney, imagine hanging on a rope and actually reaching for another rope and letting go. That moment in midair, I couldn't think of anything more frightening. And so if you think about coaching people who are trying to change, they're holding tight onto one rope. They might even see that other rope and you may get them reach for it. But now you won't let them let go. And like when your kids were at the monkey bars when you were a kid and they're holding both rings, well, let go. No, I can't let go. Right. And now they're stuck. So I have found metaphors like this make it easier for people to visualize that they're not crazy. They're not, held back on stuff, that they need to find that vine and let go of the old one.
Yeah. Between the point in time, like that 3-year, 5-year, 30-year, there are going to be hundreds of vines in between here and there. So sometimes we see the vine over there and we're like, I can't ever get there. This seems like the chasm is way too big. It's either a cliff or a curb. We're not really sure how far it is. We think it's a cliff and then you're like, oh, that was just a curb. But the fear is real. So it's not for the faint of heart.
Well, fear I refer to as FEAR, false expectation appearing real. And I visualize the two metaphors I use are paper handcuffs. Like I'm bound by these handcuffs, but wait, Jack, they're paper. You can break them anytime. Or to use your point as a curve or a clip is like a one-sided wall, right? There's this wall in my way. And it's only when I walk through it and look back did I realize the wall was never really there. So I think all of us have one-sided walls and paper handcuffs that protect us from hurt, harm. I talk a little bit in the book about dreams versus demons. And some people aren't willing to dream. And one of the reasons why I love kids, especially little kids, is they're dreamers, right? And it's only when they get a little older that they start having demons that they likely got from their parents. And can you acknowledge your demons and still reach for a dream? Can you reach for a dream and still deal with your demons? You need community to help with that. But a lot of times, the people closest to us become demons holding us back because they have a vested interest in the way our relationship is right now. If you ask me why I got divorced the first time, in context, the only time, in context, I had this kind of curiosity that I was dense to the fact that my interest in everything to look at and try different things made my wife at the time, it triggered her belief that she was not smart, that she wasn't well educated. And this was not the case, but this was her demon holding her back. And it created tension in our relationship because anytime I was trying to aspire, if that's the word, she was holding me back because she had a vested interest that we should be aligned. And I think relationships and people in business have this same slope of growth tendency. If I grow or regress at a different amplitude and frequency than you do, then we're going to have tension at times. And unless we can talk that out and be aware of what's going on, we can't really navigate through it. And that's really one of the times when people say, how do I know when to leave a company? I think you know when to leave a company when the tension of growth or regression is too great. And now it's time to go find someplace else.
Yeah, I think that's really good. My husband and I say when you've outgrown your fishbowl, and so you keep hitting the wall and then you're irritated back to the frustration, you don't really know why. Or a person is trying to grow or they're trying to do new things or they want to move. Often it's when you leave that group that knows you and has defined you and your identity and your role, because group dynamics, we all have a bubble. No, sit down. This is your role. You bring the chips every Saturday. And you're like, I don't want to bring chips anymore. I want to make a turkey. And everyone's like, no, you don't make turkeys, you do chips. And then people are frustrated. But it's when they get outside that environment, which is super scary, and move into some other place so you can get new fishbowl.
And I think that's real.
So,
I think that happens.
yeah, I think so too. I totally agree. I see that more and more. But I really appreciate the part that you're sharing and how I think it's all connected to values, which I don't know that I've ever spent the time to really deep dive all of these connections and really see that. So I appreciate you letting me walk through this journey with you because it has been very eye-opening for me today to consider value systems and identity and then how that play out and that self-limiting belief system and these tension we see in the dynamic of what that looks like every day and how it is very much connected, which I don't think we often see.
Yeah. And the word you used early on was community, right? And community could be faith, it could be your family. You could end up with a dysfunctional family, right? You didn't recruit into it, you were born into it, right? Or you could be in one of those rare, families where it was leave it to beaver and everyone smiled and all that kind of stuff, right? And so we are a making of everyone that has been in our life to this point, and it becomes scary to step away and try and make something new with new people.
Yeah, that's very true. So I had a couple of rapid fire questions I was going to ask you. Okay. The first one is what's one value that has remained non negotiable for you throughout your career? Freedom. I love that. I love that. Number two is what is a book, a scripture, or a quote that anchors you during tough decisions?
I have two. Life is easy if you'll do the hard stuff, but life is hard if you only do the easy stuff. And I believe that where does good judgment and good experience come from? Bad experience comes from bad judgment. But if you can learn from the experience, then bad experience gives you the opportunity for good judgment to have a good experience. So maybe the two most powerful words in the English language are next time, or 5 words, next time I'll do better. And I think if you can think through that, that's at least how I have ground through the downs in order to get to ups.
Wow, that's really good. And then the third one is what's one leadership myth that you think holds people back?
I think the leadership myth that holds people back is I can't be like him. I think the best leaders are themselves. They're not emulating somebody else. I think the myth is that leaders are born. I don't think that's the case. I'm a believer that you can make yourself into a leader. I was at a conference and I was sitting at the table where the speaker was, and the speaker happened to be General Powell. And so I turned to him and I said, General Powell, excuse me. Hi, Jack Cohen. Nice to meet you. And I said, I have a question about leadership. And he said, sure, Jack. I said, how would you define leadership? And he looked at me and he says, best definition I ever got was from a non-com. Jack, do you know what a non-com is? I said, no, sir. He says, it's not a commissioned officer. So this was a normal person who had listed. And he once said to me, General, I follow him because he makes me curious. So think about that. Can you, as a leader, not only create a vision, but describe one that's compelling enough for somebody to follow? I think anyone can do that. The myth that you have to be born into leadership, I think, is a myth that holds people back.
Yeah, I love that one. Jack, it has been a huge pleasure. And again, thank you so much for sharing your time and all your stories and your mentorship with me personally.
Thank you.
I tell people I'm super selfish on my podcast because it's all the great conversations I get to have. So I hope that we stay in touch and maybe we'll open a dive shop in Portugal one day.
I'd love it. It'd be fun.
That sounds good.
All right.
So much.
Thank you.
Hey friends, thanks for listening today. I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Jack and I will definitely keep you updated if we open that dive shop in Portugal, which would be super awesome. So here's my question for you today. What's one value that drives your leadership decisions? Share your thoughts on social media and tag me if you get a chance. I'd love to hear how you're leading with purpose. So if you haven't already, don't forget to jump over to danitacummins.com and join the Entrusted to Lead community, because every month we're giving you a newsletter, extra blogs, and of course you get our wonderful podcast. But our goal this year is to really give you all the tools, tips, and resources to help you with personal and organizational leadership, your faith, and anything that I find throughout the month that I think would be important or helpful to you, I'm sharing it. So you don't want to miss all those great, amazing things. And don't forget that my book, Promise Over Purpose, is available on Amazon and Audible. So jump over there, grab a copy of the book. Have an amazing day. Keep showing up every day, even when it hurts, because you matter. I'll see you later. Bye.